U.S. debt crisis 2025 is even worse than 2024. Let's get into it.
By congratulating the US governments for reaching a new milestone. So the US federal government is now in debt by $37 trillion. Like, we did it, everyone. So this is the official stats according to the US Treasury's websites. Okay, so this is where we were last year. So at the end of fiscal year 2024, the government was in debt by $35.5 trillion. But you have to remember that this is fiscal year. So the fiscal year ends September 30th. So we're almost done with fiscal year 2025. Now, I want to show you how the government's been balancing their budget so far this year in 2025. And you can find this exact same thing for yourself on the Treasury's website. And I must say that they're actually pretty transparent about how bad they are with their spending problem. All right, so as you can see right now, it goes up to the end of June. So up to the end of June in 2025, the federal government is at a deficit of $1.33 trillion. So this just means that they spent $1.33 trillion more than they had coming in, this year up to that point. And this is actually worse than 2024, but it's slightly better than 2023. So I want to show you this. Okay, so you see how the deficit goes down here in April. So I want to explain this. So in this time frame, it's tax season and Q1 tax deposits. So you have a lot of tax money that's coming in, and there's more money coming in than going out during this window of time. So that makes sense, right? Now, when you look at this light purple line right here, which is 2025, and you see it trending downward. So the government actually had a $27 billion surplus in June, which sounds amazing. So you may get the impression like, wow, things are turning around. The government is not overspending, but unfortunately, that is not the case. So I don't want to rain on the parade, but this is what actually happened. So payments that were supposed to be made on June 1st were made on May 30th because June 1st was a Sunday. So it made June look better than it really was. So if those payments were made on June 1st, then the government would have ran a $71 billion deficit in June. And that would have brought the year-to-date deficit up to $1.4 trillion, which is actually worse than 2023.
I don't know how this happens, but we're living in a world where they can just print infinite amount of money. That's what I was saying, man. Saving money is cool. It's not always practical when they're always printing money. Saving money is better than not having any money. But for me personally, I like to always make my money work for me, just because I know they're always printing money, so it literally doesn't help to save money. But I should also save more money. I've been trying, but I need to really focus on that too. But for the most part, most of my money is in assets.
And of course, that's worse than last year as well. Anyways, that line graph was coming from the Treasury's website, and they didn't update their charts for the July figures. But for the month of July, the overspending continues, so nothing's changed. So you'll notice a small surplus in June because that's when the tax deposits come in. So that's for install 2. So if you're a business owner or independent contractor, then you know that your tax deposits are due in April, that's install 1, and in June, install 2. So I hope that explains this. But for fiscal year 2025, the deficit is expected to be $1.9 trillion. And that's going to be a little bit worse than the $1.8 trillion last year. And just so you're aware, the government announces how much money that they plan on borrowing in the upcoming quarters. All right, so we're in the middle of August, right? Which means that we're in the middle of the third quarter. So I want to show you what's coming up in Q4 of 2025 and Q1 of 2026. So in Q4 of 2025, the Treasury expects to borrow just over $1 trillion. In Q1 of 2026, they expect to borrow $590 billion. Now, this is very concerning because as the government accumulates more and more debt, they need to pay more interest. And of course, it's definitely not helping that interest rates are relatively high, at least compared to the prior decade. And this just means that more of our tax dollars are going towards paying interest instead of going towards more productive expenditures. And it's just sad because we're paying $1 trillion of interest this year. That's what's going to happen. And the government collects $5 trillion a year. That means 20% of all the tax money that we give them is going towards paying interest. Now, I just want you to take a look at how much...
That is ridiculous. something's got to be done. I don't know what's going to be done, but like I said, I think maybe something with crypto, but yeah, dude, this is absurd. And we just have to keep going along with this. And then we're going to hear Jerome Powell talk about the economy is still holding strong, so we're going to wait to see what the evidence reflects. And from there, we'll be able to make a determination about how we approach this very special circumstance that is this economy. It's like, dude, you didn't even say anything. Like, I don't know, like,
much more manageable the situation was back in 2020 and 2021. I mean, this was when the government had much less debt and the interest rates were lower. So back then, the interest expense was around $300 billion a year. And I'd say it's pretty straightforward. It's like if you have credit card debts, if you have a low balance and a low teaser introductory rates, then the monthly payments are going to be manageable. But as you get deeper into debt and your interest rate jumps up, then you're going to be in serious trouble. So this is why President Trump has been posting things like this. Take a look for yourself. Trump is upset that Powell and the Federal Reserve are not cutting interest rates, which is causing the government to spend more, like much, much more, on interest expense. In another example, President Trump says that the Federal Reserve should cut interest rates by 3%. And the $1 trillion that he's referring to is the expected interest expense run rate. Okay, so the Federal Reserve, so their Fed funds interest rate is currently at 4.5%. If the Fed were to cut interest rates by 3%, that would drop the rates from the 4.5% to 1.5%. But I must say that if interest rates go down drastically like that, the Fed funds rate, then of course that would be inflationary. But yeah, I mean, just to show you that that situation is getting really bad. I mean, here's the fiscal year to date. The government is spending more of our tax dollars on interest expense than they are on many other major categories. But I do want to point out that even if interest rates go down, the amount of debts is going to continue to increase because the government refuses to balance their budget. And as the debt grows, that's going to be more debt that needs to pay interest. And I want to show you this projection of how much the government will pay in interest. So please be aware that this is just an estimate because it doesn't factor in emergencies. So for example, if the government needs to do bailouts, then they're going to have to borrow even more money than these projections. And that means more interest expense.
I'm going to be honest with you. I'll probably assume they'll probably print like 50 trillion. They won't say that, but I feel like that's what they're going to do. I don't know, man. We're getting into some weird times, man. You don't ever know what's going to happen. Yeah, man, it's really just a coin toss at this point.
If the economy goes bad, then they're going to have to borrow even more money. If they want to do stimulus, like I'm not talking about like stimulus checks, but just other forms of stimulus, then that's more money that they're going to have to borrow. Anyways, I want to show you why the government is planning on borrowing so much money, $1.6 trillion over the next 2 quarters. So this is the federal government's checking account. This is their Treasury General accounts. So as you can see, it's been running a little bit low and they want to replenish. So 10 years ago and prior, they kept a much lower balance, around $100 billion in their checking accounts. But now, now that their spending has gotten out of control,
honestly, I think they're going to print so much money just to really buy some time, right? Like whatever this 2020 to 2022, I think they're probably going to do like 3-4 of that just so that like everybody is so flush with cash, it'll take at least 10 years before it really hits. But then once it does, everybody will be screwed.
$1 trillion a year, they want to keep a higher minimum balance in their checking accounts near the $800 billion range. Now, I just want you to think about this because this is a problem. This is a very big problem. So the government needs to borrow a lot of money and refinance a lot of debt that's coming due, right? So the government needs to sell more bonds. But the fear is that if the government needs to borrow like all this money, like so much money, and if there's a lack of countries, institutions, and investors that are willing to lend money to the government, then that's going to be a problem. Because if you have that case, then the US government would need to offer and pay a higher interest rates to borrow money. So it's very straightforward. Just think about it like this. If the government needs to borrow $10 trillion over the next, let's just say, year, and they offer an interest rate of 4.5%, but if there's not enough people willing to lend to the government at 4.5%, then the government needs to raise their offering to, let's just say, 5% or 6% to attract enough lenders. And then in that case, it's going to be more expensive for the government to borrow money. And that's what we're actually seeing in the market. The bond auctions have been weak. So it's because there's so much supply and so much bonds that they need to sell. Okay, so that is the current fiscal situation. We're in a debt crisis. It's not getting better. It's actually getting worse. I'm going to keep you updated.
Well, there you have it, guys. We are going to be printing massive amounts of money. Get ready. I've actually been ready for this for some years now, but I just knew the economy was going to go to crap, so I was like, let me just load up. But yeah, dude, get ready for money printing, and I'll see you there. Deuce.